I once watched a young apprentice in a small pottery studio. He was bursting with talent, his hands itching to spin the clay into some new wild form. But every time he tried, his master, a silent old man, would walk over, inspect the work for a moment, and then calmly crush it back into a lump. He would then place a single plain teacup in front of the apprentice. The instruction was always the same: copy this. For months, this was his entire world, not creating, but replicating. The frustration was etched on his face. You could almost hear him thinking, how will I ever find my own voice if I'm forced to only mimic his? It felt like the opposite of art. It felt like being trained as a machine. But then one day, after he had finally produced a cup that was a flawless, indistinguishable copy, the master picked it up, nodded, and said something that changed everything. Good. Now you may begin. This idea that the path to true freedom begins not with rebellion but with perfect imitation feels completely backwards to many of us. But it's a core philosophy that underpins mastery in Japan, and it might just change the way you think about learning anything. Okay, let's unpack this. That story of the Potter's Apprentice, it really captures this philosophy that feels completely counterintuitive in our world, right?
Absolutely. The idea that true, lasting freedom is earned through perfect, sometimes grueling imitation.
Yeah, and it's not just about pottery or art. It feels like a deep, systematic path to mastery in, well, anything.
It really is.
So today we're diving into this core Japanese concept, shuhari.
And what's so fascinating here, I think, is how this ancient martial arts concept, it basically means follow, break, transcend, provides such a structured blueprint.
Right.
For learning pretty much anything today, from cutting-edge software development, like you mentioned, to highly specialized surgery.
Wow, okay.
And even how big global companies manage cultural change. We're really looking at how getting that initial form perfect sets the stage for genuine, sustainable innovation.
Innovation that's built on something solid, not just the latest trend.
Exactly. Not just fleeting ideas, but real grounded progress.
So our mission here is to understand each of these three stages, shu, ha, and ri. See how they pop up in some surprising, maybe even high-stakes contexts.
Yeah, and explore how leaders, coaches, people in organizations are actually using shuhari as a kind of compass for growth.
Making sure they're putting their energy, their resources, where it's going to yield the most, mastery in the long run.
Precisely.
Okay, let's start with the basics then. Where does this concept, shuhari, actually come from? What's its background, its historical context?
Well, the idea is quite old. It's definitely rooted deep in Japanese martial arts. Aikido is maybe the most famous example people know.
Right, martial arts makes sense.
But its formal development, and crucially its application, weren't just limited to combat. It was actually formalized almost 4 centuries ago in the very structured world of no theater.
No theater, interesting.
Yeah, and also applied really rigorously in Sado, which is the way of tea. The Japanese tea ceremony.
Okay. That precision makes sense there, too.
It does. And what it describes is a student's necessary sort of linear progression towards really profound mastery. The overarching idea is that true intuition, that ability to innovate freely, it has to be preceded by deep, often repetitive adherence to form.
Okay, so it's a progression through 3 distinct stages. Let's break down that foundation first.
Wow.
The initial step, shu. What's the main job of the novice here?
Right, shu. It translates literally to things like protect, obey, or preserve. This is the novice stage, the beginning. And the mandate is really strict, focused adherence.
Just follow the rules.
Pretty much. The student's primary task is to internalize the fundamentals, the techniques, the heuristics, even the proverbs, by strictly following the instructions of just one master, or maybe one single proven manual.
The critique we often hear in modern learning is that this suppresses critical thinking. In shu, is the student really supposed to just copy without asking why?
That's exactly it, and it's crucial. The critical element of shu practice is copying techniques without any modification, and importantly, without yet attempting to fully understand the rationale, the deeper conceptual why.
Why is that so important?
Well, the goal is maximum efficiency in building that foundational, lasting technical bedrock. Think about it. If you let a novice start experimenting right away, they might develop 5 new habits, right?
Yeah.
But maybe 4 of those are inefficient or even fundamentally flawed in the long run. By following a single, proven route, they bypass potentially years of frustrating trial and error. It's about efficiency in building that base.
Okay, so the instructor or the master holds the keys to the next level. The student only moves on when they've truly internalized that fundamental form.
That's the traditional interpretation, yes. The instructor has to decide when the student has absorbed the forms so deeply they're almost in their muscle memory.
It's not just about knowing the steps intellectually.
Not at all. It's about having those steps become unconscious, like a reliable reflex. You're building a solid mental library of effective patterns. If you rush this shoe phase, everything that comes after every innovation, every adaptation, it's going to be built on a really fragile, inconsistent base.
Makes sense. So once that perfect form is established, then the student moves to Ha. This is where that curiosity, the why question that was maybe suppressed in Shu finally gets to, well, bloom.
Exactly. Ha means things like detach, digress, or break. This is the journeyman stage, and honestly, it's probably the most conceptual demanding phase.
More demanding than the initial discipline.
In a different way, yes. Because the student, who's now technically quite proficient, begins this process of active intellectual reflection. The focus shifts entirely to understanding the meaning and the purpose of what they've learned, getting that crucial conceptual insight. They have to start locating the limitations of that single procedure they mastered in Shu.
So they're actively looking for the breaking points, the edges of the rules they just spent maybe months or years defending. That sounds like it requires a specific kind of mental flexibility.
It requires intellectual honesty, I think, and maturity. They start looking for the meta rules, rules about when the initial procedure breaks down or when an exception is actually warranted.
Okay.
And they start looking at how different techniques from maybe other sources, other masters, might integrate or conflict with what they know. This is really where experimentation and adaptation kick in.
But it's not just random experimentation.
No, not at all. It's about striking a careful balance between developing autonomy and staying grounded in the guidance of their established framework. The goal is to gain a really profound understanding of the underlying principles.
So they can reason about why things work, not just recite the steps mechanically.
Precisely. They're prepared to reason about the background behind the techniques.
And that leads us finally to the goal of all this rigor, the transcendence, Rhi.
Yeah.
What defines the master practitioner in this last stage?
Rhi is leave, separate, or transcend. This is the master stage. And here, the practitioner is now fully self-learning, self-correcting. They're creating their own unique approaches.
Their own style.
Exactly. Adapting everything they've learned to truly novel or unique circumstances, often without consciously relying on any external source or manual anymore.
But if they leave the forms entirely, how do they ensure they're still effective, still, grounded?
Because the initial forms, the principles learned in Shu and analyzed in Ha, are now completely integrated into their consciousness.
Yeah.
It's not that they forget the rules, it's that they embody the principles behind the rules.
Okay.
They've achieved such profound mastery that their knowledge is just woven throughout everything they do, 1,000 thoughts and actions. They might depart completely from the original specific techniques, but they adhere perfectly to the underlying principles.
So it's intuitive action based on deep knowledge.
Yes. As the Aikido master, Endo Seisha Roshihan, put it, the master acts in accordance with what the heart or mind desires, totally unhindered by specific techniques, while somehow never overstepping fundamental laws. The movement becomes natural. The innovation feels intuitive, authentic.
This whole structure seems so contrary to the emphasis on early self-expression and maybe finding your own way that we often value in Western educational models.
It is a profound contrast, isn't it? We often encourage kids or new employees to find their own voice or think outside the box almost immediately. We kind of rush them into Ha or even Rhi before they have the essential building blocks.
Yeah, before they've even mastered the box itself.
Right. The Shuhari philosophy argues quite powerfully, I think, that you achieve true creative freedom and genuine personal style, not by rejecting foundational discipline early on, but by achieving such deep, internalized familiarity with the basics that you can then effortlessly move beyond them. The discipline of the past isn't a cage. It's actually the engine of future innovation.
Okay, so if the real difference between just a skilled technician and a true innovator is grasping that conceptual why, how does this rigid progression actually translate into high-stakes professional fields? Like, how does that initial tactical adherence build the crucial conceptual insight needed for, say, surgery or complex software?
That transition you mentioned, from just tactical adherence in Shu to real conceptual insight in Ha and Rhi, it's absolutely central. It's the whole point, really. You see, many people struggle in their careers, when they only know how to do something, the steps of a procedure.
They know the recipe, but not the chemistry.
Exactly. Knowing the mechanical steps makes you useful for others. You can be an employee, a cog in the machine, maybe even a replaceable one if we're being blunt.
Ouch.
But knowing the conceptual drivers, the why behind it all, that makes you useful for yourself. It enables genuine agency, the ability to transfer skills, to know when a rule can be broken, and ultimately, leadership.
Let's make this concrete. Let's go into the operating room. We heard about this surgeon, Dr. Tanaka, who was forced into a really profound shu phase by his master, Dr. Mori. What was the specific, grueling task that Mori imposed?
Yeah, it's a powerful example. Dr. Mori forced Tanaka, who was already seen as brilliant, by the way, to spend an entire year doing nothing but the most basic surgical closure, suturing.
Just stitching up wounds for a whole year.
For a whole year. Not complex operations, just the meticulous closing of the wound using Mori's rigid technique. He demanded exact replication of Mori's own slow, almost painfully deliberate hand movements.
And Tanaka must have felt stifled, insulted even.
Completely. He felt his talent was being utterly wasted on mechanical mimicry. He thought it was beneath him.
But as the story goes, there was a hidden lesson in that mechanical how, wasn't there? Something that led to a deeper why.
There was. The lesson was buried in the speed, or rather the lack of speed. Tanaka eventually had this breakthrough realization. Mori's slow technique wasn't about the efficiency of closing the wound quickly.
Okay. What was it about then?
It was engineered, deliberately, to minimize trauma to the surrounding tissue at the incision line. Every single slow, careful movement was designed to reduce micro tears, to maximize blood flow and oxygen supply to the healing area.
So the discipline enforced a much deeper foundational principle, that the key to great surgery isn't just fixing the immediate problem, but optimizing the entire recovery process.
Exactly. He moved past just the mechanical step of closing skin and internalized the profound systemic consequence of how it was done. Tissue integrity above raw speed.
That's the conceptual leap.
That's the leap from shu to ha. That insight became his bedrock of profound discipline, as the source called it. Now, fast forward years later, Tanaka is an experienced surgeon, clearly in his rephase, and he faces a sudden crisis mid-operation.
What was the challenge? Something unexpected that forced him to innovate beyond the textbook.
He was deep into a highly complex liver resection, a really major surgery. And suddenly, he encountered an unexpected, aggressive vascular tear. A catastrophic complication, literally not covered properly in the textbooks, where all the standard procedures he knew were failing right in front of him.
High pressure. The standard response might be panic or just reverting to the last thing you practiced.
Absolutely. But Tanaka, because he had so deeply internalized that principle of meticulous tissue handling his shu foundation from all those sutures, he consciously ignored the standard textbook closure recommendations for that kind of bleed.
So what did he do instead? What was the specific innovation?
He blended things. He took the traditional principles of meticulous minimal trauma technique that Mori had drilled into him for a year, and he combined it, synthesized it, with a completely new vascular clamping concept he'd actually seen presented at an unrelated cardiology seminar. He didn't just use the clamp like he saw. He adapted the angle, the pressure, based on his deep intuitive understanding of liver tissue tolerance, something he only had because of that initial shu phase.
Wow, so he created a novel solution on the spot, under pressure.
He did. A life-saving approach that prevented massive blood loss and saved the patient. That ability to synthesize disparate knowledge and create a working solution in a crisis, that's the ultimate demonstration of remastery, built on discipline.
That kind of robust innovation, built on that foundational discipline, it feels exactly like what the modern technical world is often searching for, especially in demanding fields like DevOps and agile software development.
It really is. And the concept, Shuhari, is now actually being widely adopted as an agile-based training methodology, specifically in the DevOps space.
Why there in particular?
Because traditional training models often fail spectacularly in DevOps. They result in high costs, low actual competency. The technical challenge is just immense. Teams need to master dozens of different automation, configuration, monitoring tools, all at the same time.
And the common failure point is just information overload, right? Trying to learn everything at once and mastering absolutely nothing properly.
That's precisely the dependency hell that Shuhari helps solve. In a typical, less structured training, a team might try to learn 10 different complex tools like Ansible, Kubernetes, Jenkins, Terraform, all concurrently.
And then they can't integrate them.
Exactly. They fail to integrate them effectively because they never truly mastered the functional core, the shu, of any single one. Shuhari provides the necessary structure to manage that incredibly complex learning curve.
Okay, so how does the Shu phase specifically prevent this dependency problem in a DevOps context?
Right. The Shu phase focuses the novice team on learning the rules and instructions until they really sink in. But critically, they concentrate only on the functionality of individual tools or tasks in isolation first.
Like one tool at a time?
Pretty much. For example, a team might spend, say, 2 solid months mastering only the configuration and deployment function of just Ansible. They follow strict documentation standards, learn the tool precisely by the book, maybe working towards a simple single-component continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline using only that tool. They learn the how of Ansible perfectly.
Okay, makes sense. Then in Ha, they start testing the boundaries, looking at how these individual pieces fit together.
Correct. In the Ha phase, they start doing the hands-on work of integrating those now mastered individual components into a larger system. They begin customizing the workflow, maybe exploring different automation languages or approaches.
And documenting limitations.
Yes, crucially, documenting the limitations of the initial tools they learned in Shu. They're moving past just knowing what Ansible does to understanding why it fits or doesn't fit within the broader system architecture. They're gaining that system principle insight.
The conceptual why again?
Exactly. And finally, Re is achieved when the team becomes a truly self-sustaining unit. They're constantly optimizing the whole system. They're capable of mentoring new joiners effectively. And they're intuitively seeing and implementing architectural improvements that provide better, real value to the organization. They're not just following recipes anymore, they're writing new ones.
It's really clear how this model drives mastery for individuals and even for teams working together. But how do you scale that kind of discipline across an entire organization? It sounds like Shuhari could be a framework for transforming corporate culture itself, tackling systemic problems like, say, knowledge transfer between generations.
Absolutely. It offers a structured blueprint for achieving both organizational stability and flexibility, often at the same time, which is a huge challenge. We saw this need play out at Kawatech, described as a family-owned software company in Kyoto. They were facing really profound stagnation.
What was the core problem?
They had this classic split. Older veterans who held all the critical knowledge about the legacy code, the core systems.
The ones who knew how everything really worked.
Exactly. And then they had younger hires, full of energy, familiar with modern tools and techniques, but who felt completely stifled by the old ways. They felt their skills weren't valued, which led to high attrition among the newer staff.
That generational knowledge gap is so corrosive, isn't it? The veterans feel disrespected or ignored, the young talent gets frustrated and leaves, and innovation just grinds to a halt.
It does. But Kawatech managed to bridge this gap successfully by implementing a formal Shuhari structure for all their project development. They made it an explicit organizational policy.
So how did they structure the Shu phase at an organizational level?
Their organizational Shu phase was deliberately rigorous. They required all new hires, regardless of prior experience, to strictly follow the company's traditional, very detailed, like 100-page coding and documentation standards.
Even if those standards seemed archaic?
Yes, even if they seemed archaic, like apparently mandatory, detailed, handwritten component diagrams before any new code could even be deployed.
Handwritten diagrams. Wow, that sounds deliberately tedious.
It probably was, but it achieved two really crucial objectives simultaneously. First, it explicitly honored the veteran engineers by validating the rigor and wisdom embedded in their established practices. It showed respect.
Okay, that builds bridges.
And second, it ensured that the new hires deeply understood the foundational architecture and the core business logic that maintained the company's product stability. They were forced to absorb the organizational principles through this strict technical discipline. It instilled discipline while building that crucial intergenerational respect.
Clever. And then, of course, they had to pivot towards change eventually. How did they manage the move into an organizational Ha phase?
The organizational Ha phase was designed to explicitly encourage teams to challenge the old methods, but in a structured way. New tools, new libraries, new frameworks could absolutely be proposed.
But there was a catch.
There was a condition. The team proposing the change had to demonstrate clearly, with evidence, why the old way was insufficient for a specific context and, crucially, how the proposed new way still adhered to the established core principles of stability and quality that they learned in Shu.
So innovation had to be justified against the core values.
Precisely. And the senior engineers, the veterans, acted as guides in this phase. They shared contextual history, explain the why behind the old rules, rather than just acting as gatekeepers, simply vetoing new ideas. This collaborative challenge culminated in the Rephase development sprint, where the team synthesized the stability of the old knowledge with the flexibility offered by the new tools they justified.
And the result was this hybrid Yokohama method, a sustainable engine for evolution, not just a one-off project.
Exactly. It was a successful cultural transformation, blending the best of both worlds. However, achieving this kind of systemic change, this organizational learning, it brings us right to a major critique within professional development circles, particularly in agile coaching,
Yes.
which is that the coaches themselves are often focused on the wrong tier of the organization, completely undermining any chance of a successful Shuhari progression at the organizational level.
You're talking about the agile coaching paradox, right? Spending loads of time drilling teams on technical processes like Scrum or Kanban, when the management structure above them is actively preventing any real change from sticking.
That's exactly it. The sources we looked at are quite blunt about this. While a coach's time might often feel like it's, say, 70% spent interacting directly with the development teams.
Because that's where the visible agile stuff happens.
Right. But real-world successful organizational transformations suggest the ratio needs to be closer to 60% of the coach's time spent working with middle management, then maybe 30% with the team, and only about 10% directly with senior leadership.
Wow, 60% of middle management. Why is that layer so critical, and what's the primary cause of failure when coaches get this wrong?
The primary cause is fundamental misalignment. What happens is many trainers and the organizations that hire them prioritize the lucrative, high-volume certification classes. Think Certified Scrum Masters, CSM, things like that. These are mostly geared towards team members.
Right, get the team certified.
So you have these newly trained, enthusiastic teams brimming with shoe-level knowledge of agile practices. They then return to an organization where resource allocation, goal setting, performance reviews, policy enforcement, all the things controlled primarily by middle management remain completely dysfunctional and deeply rooted in old-school command and control methodologies.
So the team is coached to build and run this efficient engine,
Yep.
but middle management is still steering the car directly towards a cliff, or maybe just putting water in the gas tank.
That's a great analogy. That misalignment basically guarantees failure, and inevitably who gets blamed.
Agile doesn't work here, or the teams just couldn't make it stick.
Exactly. Middle management becomes the critical leverage point, or the critical bottleneck. They control the budgets, the resources, the incentive structures that either support or undermine agile principles. And maybe most importantly, they act as the essential organizational firewall or filter between senior strategy and team execution. If they haven't achieved at least SHU in understanding and practicing servant leadership principles
They'll just keep imposing conflicting priorities.
constantly, they'll create organizational noise, demand metrics that contradict agile values, micromanage, completely undermining the team's ability to even practice SHU, let alone transition into HA or RE.
So the real solution requires a targeted SHU phase for leadership itself, getting them to internalize the new forms, the new ways of managing and leading.
Absolutely. Coaches need to partner with, mentor, and train those management tiers, especially middle management, so they can internalize the principles of empowerment, delegation, and removing impediments. The coach should arguably spend the majority of their time enabling leaders so that those leaders can then effectively coach and support their teams. That's how you prevent systemic organizational misalignment.
And this organizational application of Shuhari, it ties into HR practices too, like defining skills.
Yes, it's key for HR and for successful agile adoption more broadly. Using tools like a team competency matrix becomes much more meaningful when overlaid with Shuhari. It helps create a common, transparent understanding and, crucially, consensus regarding what different skill levels novice, journeyman, expert, or Shuhari actually mean within that specific organization's context. It clarifies the path to mastery for everyone.
Okay, so if management needs to achieve its own form of mastery, and the teams themselves are moving through these phases, Shu, Ha, Ri, then the coach guiding them has to be really dynamic, right? They can't just use one approach.
Absolutely not.
Which raises a really important question. Should a great coach always be encouraging self-discovery, always asking those powerful questions? Or are there specific times, specific stages where direct instruction, maybe even being prescriptive, is actually necessary?
The Shuhari model makes a very strong case for what you might call situational coaching. The coach's style, their approach, must be tailored precisely to the learner's current stage of development. There's no one-size-fits-all.
Okay, so take a team that's brand new, clearly in the SHU phase. What should the coach be prepared to do then?
Well, if you encounter a freshly minted, maybe uncertain shoe-level novice team, the coach absolutely should be prepared to provide direct, sometimes even prescriptive, guidance and support.
Can you give an example? When would being prescriptive be the right call in that shoe phase?
Okay, let's say a new team is really struggling with transparency. Maybe they aren't making their work visible. A coach leaning too heavily on pure self-discovery may just ask endless questions like, well, what does transparency mean to you?
Right, which might not get them anywhere fast.
Exactly. In that shoe stage, a more effective coach might prescriptively help them define their definition of done, a really essential technical guideline for quality. Or they might directly clarify organizational constraints they need to work within. You give them the necessary structure, the form, that they need to succeed initially.
And conversely, for an experienced, maybe RAI-level master team,
For them, the coach is much more hands-off. The focus shifts to conceptual challenges, maybe strategic alignment, removing high-level organizational impediments. You're guiding, not directing.
But this idea of situational prescriptiveness, it seems to run counter to a trend we see, where many coaches seem to lean really heavily on purely non-directive methods. The ones who famously refuse to tell the team anything.
It does, and it's a significant professional critique highlighted in the materials. There appears to be a discipline-wide tendency, perhaps especially in agile coaching, to be too soft, to default almost exclusively to asking those powerful questions or relying on vague answers like, well, it depends, or maybe facilitating games meant to encourage self-discovery.
And the problem with that?
The problem is that this approach often avoids the difficult, sometimes uncomfortable, hard bits of real coaching.
What are these hard bits that some coaches might shy away from?
Things like directly addressing persistent poor personal performance within a team, or tackling a clear lack of estimate integrity teams, constantly missing commitments without reflection, or confronting genuinely dysfunctional interpersonal dynamics that are crippling the team's progress.
Things that require more than just asking questions.
Exactly. A truly effective coach needs the courage, and just as importantly, the specific knowledge and experience to intervene directly when a team is clearly heading for a crash. For instance, if a team insists on estimating their work at, say, an absurdly fine granularity, like trying to break everything down into 4-hour task segments, and they're visibly losing all their velocity, getting bogged down in complexity.
The coach shouldn't just ask, and how does that feel?
Right. A great coach, seeing that clear anti-pattern, needs the guts to step in and say, stop it. Look, this specific practice is a well-known anti-pattern that consistently causes X, Y, and Z failures in teams like yours. Let me show you 3 other estimation approaches that we've seen work much more successfully in similar situations.
So they need to leverage their own experience, not just facilitate the team's discovery.
They absolutely must leverage all their relevant experience, including their non-agile, maybe traditional project management or technical background, to provide concrete options and make specific recommendations when needed. Real courage in coaching isn't just asking the hard questions. Sometimes it's having the knowledge and conviction to provide a directional correction when safety or success clearly demands it.
This issue seems to point back to a potential structural problem with how coaches are trained or certified, doesn't it? The source material seemed critical of the certification path, suggesting it might skew too heavily towards one specific type of competence.
That seems to be a key structural flaw identified, yes. The trend, particularly within agile coaching certifications, is towards heavily emphasizing pure professional coaching skills. Often, this means aligning with the standards of bodies like the International Coach Federation, ICF, aiming for their professional certified coach, PCC level.
And those skills are valuable, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. Those non-directive, non-content-driven questioning and listening skills are essential, particularly for coaching individuals or teams who are already in the half-a-re phase. But the critique is that these pure coaching skills are only one competence within a much broader required balanced set for an effective organizational or agile coach.
So if a coach is only skilled in that non-directive coaching stance, what's the actual consequence for the client?
The risk is that you produce coaches who, despite being absolute masters of asking probing questions, might be perceived as incredibly unhelpful by clients, especially leaders who definitely need actual content expertise or direct advice.
It's the if all you have is a hammer problem.
Exactly. If the only tool in your coaching box is a non-directive hammer, you risk subjecting a senior leader who maybe needs clear consultation on organizational design or technical strategy to what the source called death by 1,000 powerful questions. That coach will quickly be perceived as a lightweight, lacking real organizational substance or practical solutions.
Okay, so an excellent coach, one who has perhaps achieved in their own coaching journey, needs a much broader tool belt, as the material put it.
Absolutely. The balanced tool belt of a master coach requires demonstrated proficiency across multiple distinct competencies. Yes, professional coaching is one, but also mentoring, providing guidance based on your own direct experience. Also, teaching structuring and delivering knowledge effectively. Modeling, demonstrating the desired behaviors yourself. Facilitating, skillfully managing group dynamics and processes. Consulting, providing expert content advice and solutions. And underpinning all of that, solid business skills and leadership skills.
Wow, that's a lot more than just asking questions.
It is. Only when a coach has mastered all these different forms, gone through their own shoe and ha phases in each of these areas, can they intuitively, situationally choose the right stance, consultant, mentor, teacher, peer coach, for the specific client need in that moment. That's true real-level coaching mastery.
This raises a really fascinating tension now. Let's say a coach does achieve that level of balance, situational mastery. They've got the full tool belt. And they find a good client, one who's genuinely open to change. Even then, they still have to navigate this really subtle trap that threatens to strip them of their objectivity and ultimately their effectiveness over time.
That's right. That is the insidious trap of assimilation, or what one source vividly called becoming part of the Borg, from Star Trek.
Resistance is futile.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It refers to the danger of long-term embedded coaching. The idea is that remaining deeply embedded within a single client's cultural context for too long. The suggestion was often anything over about 6 months consistently inevitably leads to the coach losing their crucial independent perspective.
Why does that happen? Is it just getting too comfortable or maybe inertia setting in?
It seems to be deeper than just comfort. The coach literally gets sucked into the client's culture. They start internalizing the client's internal politics. They unconsciously adapt their language to match the corporate jargon. They start seeing problems through the client's ingrained filters.
They start thinking like an insider.
Exactly. And they experience this cognitive dissonance. If they push too hard against the really deep, maybe unstated cultural norms or challenge a powerful stakeholder's pet project, they risk unsettling someone important. Or, perhaps more fundamentally, they risk compromising their steady paycheck and the comfortable relationship they've built.
So they stop inspiring genuine improvement because they subconsciously start defending the very system, the status quo they were originally hired to help change.
That's the core of the trap. The coach loses their vital, independent, external perspective. They start rationalizing or defending the client's dysfunctions, maybe even unconsciously. They stop pushing boundaries effectively. They have, in essence, become assimilated. They are no longer an external agent of change, but just a comfortable, maybe slightly critical fixture within the system.
And this applies just as much to internal coaches as external consultants?
Absolutely. The dynamic is the same. An internal coach who stays with the same division or leadership team for years can face the exact same pressures and loss of objectivity.
So the conclusion is that the necessity of an expiration date, some kind of known endpoint, is actually paramount to maintaining that critical objectivity.
It seems to be. The recommendation is that every significant coaching engagement, whether it involves an internal coach or an external one, should probably have a relatively short known expiration date. Maybe 3 to 6 months for an intense, focused engagement.
That sounds counterintuitive. Why cut it short?
Because that artificial time constraint does something crucial. It forces both the coach and the client system to be actively engaged in knowledge transfer and capability building from day one. There's a sense of urgency. It maintains the constructive pressure from the coach on the organization to actually internalize the changes and assume ownership, rather than becoming passively dependent on the coach indefinitely. It prevents the dependency that ultimately kills objectivity and real change.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but staying with this idea of navigating different contexts. Moving from the embedded coach to, say, a global manager. Shuhari also seems to provide a surprisingly powerful operational framework for true cultural synthesis, doesn't it? Allowing distinct groups, maybe from very different national or corporate cultures, to merge their expertise without one side just imposing its will on the other.
Yes, it can be a brilliant framework for that exact challenge. And this was demonstrated really well in the story of Klaus, a German manager who was sent to lead a new joint venture team down in Yokohama, Japan.
Okay, German efficiency meets Japanese consensus.
You can see the potential clash already, right? Klaus initially managed exactly as he would have in Germany, using a very direct, analytical, individualistic Western style. He prioritized speed, individual accountability, rapid decision-making based on data.
And how did that typically German approach land with the local Japanese team members?
It apparently caused what was described as quiet paralysis. The Japanese team, deeply rooted in a consensus-driven culture that values group harmony, perceived Klaus's directness not as efficiency, but as potentially creating internal competition, showing disrespect for the group process, maybe even causing individuals to lose face.
So they'd nod in the meeting.
They'd nod politely, maybe even agree verbally in the meeting to avoid direct conflict, but then afterwards, things would stall. Execution would falter because genuine consensus, genuine buy-in according to their cultural norms, hadn't actually been achieved. His initial attempt to simply impose the superior German system failed completely.
So Klaus realized he needed a different approach. He needed perhaps a cultural shoe phase first to build trust and establish a common language or understanding. He absolutely needed to validate the existing culture first, show respect for it. So he restructured the entire workflow. He personally participated in an explicit shoe phase where the entire team, including Klaus himself, rigorously and strictly followed the existing Japanese operational manual, page by page, without deviation, for a set period. He submitted himself to their way first. Exactly. He mastered the local form first. This deliberate act of humility, combined with his own rigorous adherence to their established process, did two things. It built foundational respect, and it showed the Japanese team he was genuinely willing to learn and value their embedded wisdom, not just dismiss it.
Okay, so once that trust and mutual respect for the foundational form were established, how did they then move into Ha, the phase of questioning and synthesizing the different approaches?
He then introduced a structured Ha phase. He instituted weekly meetings specifically dedicated to discussing concrete proposals to break or modify the existing Japanese manual, but again with conditions.
Conditions based on both cultures' values. Precisely. For any proposal to change the manual to pass, it had to meet two criteria. First, it had to be proven superior using objective data appealing to the German value of analytical rigor. And second, it had to achieve genuine team consensus through discussion honoring the Japanese need for group harmony and buy-in. This structured debate allowed them to carefully integrate the strengths of both cultural approaches.
So what did the resulting Yokohama method look like in their rephase? What specific elements made it a successful hybrid?
The resulting operational style was reportedly a true hybrid and highly effective. They successfully blended the Japanese focus on deep, meticulous, rigorous preliminary analysis and planning the legacy of their shared shoe phase, respecting the manual, with the German emphasis on rapid, decisive, decentralized implementation after that consensus and deep analysis was complete. They didn't just compromise or average things out, they truly synthesized the best elements, creating a novel operational style that neither culture could likely have achieved alone. They achieved both deep reliability and agile speed simultaneously.
But this kind of success, whether it's coaching or cross-cultural leadership, seems to depend entirely on the initial prudence of the coach or the leader in choosing the right engagements, the right situations in the first place.
Absolutely critical. A truly excellent coach or a leader embarking on significant change needs to practice extreme prudence in choosing their clients or their battles, using what one source colorfully called their limited bullets wisely.
Meaning, don't waste your energy on situations doomed to fail.
Exactly. They need to actively avoid clients or situations where they're viewed merely as a commodity consultant, just there to provide a prepackaged solution or tick a box. Instead, they should actively seek out clients or organizations that exhibit certain genuine, crucial traits.
Okay, what are those non-negotiable traits you should look for in a client or a situation before engaging?
Based on the insights, there seem to be a few key ones. First, the client must view the coach or change agent as a true partner, someone who holds specialized knowledge and perspective, not just a pair of hands.
Respect for expertise.
Yes. Second, the leadership must demonstrate genuine humility. They need to be curious, genuinely coachable, and willing to admit what they don't know, rather than pretending to have all the answers already.
Openness to learning.
Crucial. Third, and perhaps most critical for any systemic change effort, the client organization must demonstrate that leaders go first. The senior leadership team has to be willing, visibly willing, to be the first ones in the training, the first ones to subject their own work and behaviors to the change process. They have to model the way.
Walk the talk.
Absolutely.
Is.
And finally, they need to understand that this kind of change, whether it's agile adoption or deep cultural integration, is a continuous journey. It's something that is never really done. It's not just a project with a fixed end date and a deliverable. It requires ongoing commitment.
So that initial due diligence, assessing these factors, is almost like the coach's or leader's own shoe phase for picking the right engagement.
That's a fantastic way to put it, yes. It's about ensuring their limited time, energy, and bullets are invested wisely in situations where there's a genuine potential for sustained positive outcomes rather than just frustration and failure. Hashtag tag it outro. So when we pull it all together, we've really seen how this ancient concept, Shuhari, provides a surprisingly relevant and timeless roadmap for sustainable growth. Doesn't really matter if you're Dr. Tanaka mastering a complex surgical skill,
Or Kawa Tech redesigning a whole organization for innovation.
or Klaus trying to bridge profound cultural divides in a team. The underlying structure holds true. Those initial stages, the shoe of disciplined adherence, which often feel tedious or frustrating at the time, that's where the foundational principles get deeply absorbed. It's what prepares you for the kind of fluid, intuitive, impactful action that really characterizes a master in Ha and Ri.
Yeah, this deep dive really reveals that true excellence isn't usually found in just adopting a new label or looking for shortcuts, is it? It seems to require real rigor, that balance we talked about, and a clear-eyed recognition that the path to genuinely transcending the rules is often paved with the disciplined, sometimes painstaking practice of the fundamentals first. Maybe the true measure of a master isn't just about how many new things they can create, but the depth and integrity of the principles that underlie everything they do.
I think that's beautifully put. True freedom in any craft, any discipline, seems to begin not with premature rebellion, but with such perfect, deep imitation of the essential form that you finally internalize its core principles. And then ultimately you become the rule yourself. You embody the principles.